Why do some men appear unshakable on the outside, yet feel the weight of unseen battles within? What truly breaks a man? The chaos of the world around him, or the relentless echo inside his mind? Why do we keep returning to patterns that hurt us, even when we know better? If you're a man, you've felt that tug, that pull, and perhaps you've never seen how deeply it shaped you. Picture a day in the life of someone who seems to carry the world on his shoulders. A steady job, a steady routine, a steady facade of confidence. Yet when the lights dim and the day's noise fades, he is left with a storm of doubts, insecurities, and a sense of ownership that tightens around his heart. The pressure to be the provider, the protector, the one who never falters, can feel like a cage. The invisible walls he builds around his emotions keep him safe from judgment, but they also trap him in a cycle of control that he cannot escape. You might recognize those moments when you're pulled back into a familiar, painful pattern. The same argument, the same hurt. It's a loop that feels like a familiar melody, even though the notes are wrong. The fear of being seen as weak or vulnerable keeps you locked in place, and the desire to maintain a sense of power keeps you from asking for help. This is the paradox of possessiveness, the desire to hold on to love and feel safe, which paradoxically pushes love away. In the next few minutes, you'll discover a truth that has never been spoken aloud. Possessiveness is not a sign of strength. It is a sign of unhealed wounds and a misaligned sense of identity. You'll learn that the real battle is not with the outside world, but with the internal narrative that tells you must hold everything together. Understanding this truth can free you from the invisible shackles that have kept you bound to destructive patterns. It's a revelation that will change how you view yourself and your relationships, and it's a path toward a healthier, more authentic sense of love. The first time he heard the whisper that the world would never understand the weight he carried, it felt like a secret being handed to him on a silver platter, an invitation to a darkness he was never meant to explore. Men grow up in a ritual of swallowing, of smoothing the edges of emotion until they look like polished stone. They learn that a quiet nod is more powerful than a cry, that a stoic face is the truest sign of strength. Yet the ledger of the silent economy always balances itself with a debt that can't be paid in silence alone. Imagine a man who, like a ship, is steered by an invisible hand. He pushes his own soul into a dimly lit cabin, hoping the darkness will swallow his screams. But the cabin, no matter how sealed, never truly contains a storm. It merely muffles the wind until the pressure builds, until the walls crack. The moment the walls give, the storm is unleashed, and the man is left to navigate the wreckage alone. When did the first doubt creep into his chest? Perhaps it was a quiet afternoon, watching a child laugh without a care, and realizing that joy seemed foreign, like a word he'd never learned. Or perhaps it was a night he watched a man he respected fall into a silence that felt like a trap. In that instant, he felt the first tremor of betrayal, not towards anyone, but towards the idea that he could trust his own heart. Why do men feel more afraid of failure than of pain? Because failure is a mirror that forces you to confront the parts of yourself you prefer to keep hidden. Pain, while uncomfortable, can be endured if you have a story that justifies it. I had to do this. Failure, however, demands you admit you were wrong, that you didn't have all the answers. The internal narrative screams that admitting weakness is a sign of defeat, but the truth is that each admission is a step toward liberation. There's an uncomfortable truth about the male mind that lurks in the shadows of every conversation, a truth that is rarely spoken aloud. It is a realization that the fortress built from silence is not a shield, but a prison. The walls that were meant to protect end up isolating. When the fortress crumbles, the man is left standing in the ruins, questioning what he thought was solid ground. He wonders now, how long will I keep pretending that my silence is a shield? How many nights will I spend in that dim cabin, hoping the storm will pass? The answers are not simple, but the first step is acknowledging that the storm is not a punishment. It is a reminder that he is alive, that his heart still beats. The journey ahead is not about finding a perfect narrative, but about learning to let the story evolve, allowing the darkness to be a companion rather than a foe. The cabin's windows cast a thin, flickering light across the walls, as if the storm outside were a mirror for the turmoil inside. He sits, a hollow chair in the middle of a room that feels more like a mausoleum than a shelter. The silence he has carried for years presses against him like a weight that refuses to lift. He wonders how long he will keep pretending that silence is a shield, how many more nights he will endure the dim glow of a single lamp, hoping the thunder will eventually calm. His mind, shaped by a biology that favors problem-solving over emotional processing, has learned to shut the doors to feelings. The male brain, wired to find solutions, is not built to linger in the soft, uncertain spaces of emotion. When feelings surge, the circuitry that usually keeps him grounded flares, and he loses a sense of direction. The result is a man who has mastered the art of silence, yet feels it gnawing at the edges of his being. The darkness inside is not simply a quiet. It is a corrosive force. Many men carry unspoken emotions that erode them from the inside, a slow decay that is far more destructive than any external failure. This hidden turmoil feeds on the silence, turning it into a silent predator that feeds on hope on the idea that he can keep it all together without speaking. The longer he lets these feelings simmer, the more they take root, and the harder it becomes to pull them out. Have you ever smiled when you were breaking inside? Have you ever whispered, "I'm fine," to a stranger, only to feel the weight of that lie grow heavier with each breath? Recognizing these patterns is the first crack in the armor. The real strength, he realizes, is not in enduring every storm without complaint, but in acknowledging the quiet that threatens to drown him. The true power lies in admitting that what truly consumes him is not the external problem, but the silence that keeps him from seeing it. In that quiet, he feels a strange relief. The cabin no longer feels like a prison, but a sanctuary where he can confront the unspoken. He understands that the next step is not to fight the storm alone, but to invite others into the room, to share the weight of the silence. By doing so, he can begin to dismantle the walls he has built around his emotions, allowing the storm to pass and leaving him not only alive but alive enough to speak. The cabin's windows, once opaque with fear, now let in a muted light that feels more like a promise than a threat. He sits on the worn wooden floor, the scent of pine mingling with the faint hum of the radio that plays a slow, contemplative track. Across from him, a battered notebook rests open, its pages a silent witness to the words that have begun to surface. He realizes that the storm has not ended. It has simply shifted its focus. The wind still rattles the shutters, but the inside feels less like a battlefield and more like a shared hearth. He pulls the notebook closer, the pages turning with a soft rustle. A handwritten note in the margin catches his eye. "Speak," and the weight lifts. The words resonate with the quiet that now fills the cabin, a weight he had carried alone for years. He thinks of the man who walked in with a battered suitcase, eyes hollow, a man who once told him, "I am just tired." That man was him. But he was also someone else entirely, someone who had never spoken his name aloud. He remembers the nights he spent in his mind, fighting invisible foes that never seemed to let up. He realizes that the true battle is not against the wind, but against a silence that keeps him from sharing. He takes a breath and decides to invite someone. The door creaks open and a familiar face steps in, an old friend, a brother in the truest sense, someone who has known him since childhood. Their eyes meet, and there is an unspoken acknowledgement of the shared history of hidden battles. The friend sits beside him, and the silence between them is no longer oppressive but a space for dialogue. The friend reaches into his pocket and pulls out a small, worn photograph, a reminder of a moment when laughter seemed possible. He hands it to him, and the gesture feels like an offering of trust. In that moment, the cabin's walls, once solid, unbreachable, begin to crack. The conversation that follows is raw, honest, and unfiltered. He speaks of the nights he felt alone, of the fear of judgment, of the relief that comes from being heard. His friend listens, offering words of empathy, of shared experience. The storm outside continues, but the inside of the cabin feels lighter, as if the walls are being dismantled one stone at a time. He understands that the next step is not to fight the storm alone, but to invite more voices into the room. Each conversation becomes a brick in the new foundation of a sanctuary, a place where men can share their invisible wars without fear. The cabin, once a prison of his own making, transforms into a community hub, a safe space where the weight of silence is shared and slowly dispersed. The wind still blows, but now it carries the sound of laughter, of stories, of the promise that no one has to face their inner battle alone.